The Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will come to order. To begin today's hearing, I want to recognize the Los Banos American Legion Post 166 to post the colors, and we'll have the Honor Guard team leader lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome our witnesses, members, and our guests in the audience to today's hearing. The subcommittee is meeting today in Santanella, California for an oversight field hearing entitled Water Abundance, Opportunities, and Challenges in California. By way of introduction, I am Cliff Bentz, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries. I represent the 2nd District of Oregon. I'm grateful to be joined today by several members who represent this region. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that the gentlemen from California, Mr. Valadeo and Mr. Fong, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. Thank you. Again, welcome. And I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to begin by thanking Congressman Duarte, Congressman Valadeo, and the WWF staff for their work in arranging and structuring this hearing. The House Recording Studio for their excellent work in setting up our sound and communication systems. And just so you know, those of you who want to let your neighbors or friends know by texting how to watch this online, you would go to the naturalresources.house.gov, naturalresources.house.gov, and click on the yellow banner at the top of the webpage. This is being streamed live as I speak. I also want to thank the San Luis, Delta, Mendota, and Fremont Water Authorities for providing us with the aerial tour this morning. And thank the pilots for their excellent flying us about. And finally, I want to thank the Hotel Mission de Oro for the hospitality it has shown all of us. This congressional subcommittee is here in California's Central Valley for a number of reasons. First and foremost, to remind everyone in this great United States of the almost unbelievable scale and importance of the farming activities that occur annually in this wonderful valley. Second, to describe the unforgivable damage that political, rather than scientific, water management is wreaking upon not only those who take the annual risks to raise our food, but also on those who have to pay ever more for groceries at our grocery stores. Third, to call out the incredible and irreplaceable value to all of us of the Central Valley's water delivery, water storage, and water application systems, and infrastructure that has taken close to 150 years and billions upon billions of dollars to construct. And finally, to share concepts and ideas that will solve, rather than make worse, the problems that a warmer climate and ever more demands on our water resources will surely bring upon us. A quick and certainly not all-inclusive snapshot of what water has allowed this Central Valley to do, and we'll of course hear more about this later today, but first grow 25% of our nation's food supply. And much of this 25% is the very type of produce that the most progressive of Americans found in every blue state would tell us we should be eating more of every day. This valley generates $17 billion at least in agricultural value each year. It is home to 252 different varieties of crops. It allows at least 35,000 independent businesses sometimes referred to as farms, to exist and flourish. It creates 300,000 to 400,000 employment opportunities each and every year. And this water is stored and delivered through an existing infrastructure that does not have to be replaced, but it does have to be maintained. And I hope that we will hear testimony today that focuses upon the truly dangerous disconnect between our nation and the world's absolute need for food security on the one hand, and the environmentalists' misguided and foolish goal of returning to a time when there were not 8.2 billion people on this planet, all of whom need to be fed. Just how far back in time do those who want to and do take out things like dams and water away from farmers want all of us to go? This morning, some of us had the opportunity to fly over much of the 20,000 square miles that holds the California Central Valley Project. The tour took 2 hours. We did not see the entire project, but we saw a lot of it. We started near the Fria Dam, went over the new Melones Dam, the Delta pumping facilities, and followed the Delta Mendota Canal and California Aqueduct over to Del Puerto Canyon Reservoir. Finally, we saw the San Luis Reservoir just a few minutes from here. What an astounding collection of infrastructure. A final point, as you can see, there are 3 empty chairs. The committee invited the Bureau of Reclamation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to testify today. The Biden-Harris administration, however, has chosen not to participate. These are the same agencies that claim there has been an unprecedented display of openness as they push forward new biological opinions for the so-called coordinated operations of the CVP and State Water Project. Yet they cannot find the time to participate in a congressional hearing in this wonderful community to discuss these important issues. It's unacceptable that federal agencies that manage the operations of this impressive and irreplaceable federal project, sometimes in ways that negatively impact communities represented right here today, are blatantly ignoring congressional oversight. Nonetheless, it's my hope that the conversations we will have today will highlight the opportunities for the Central Valley and focus on solutions rather than picking winners or losers in water access or relying on science that only supports a preferred, preordained policy decision. I want to once again thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to this important discussion. I will now recognize John Duarte for a statement.
Well, first of all, good friend in Congress, Chairman Cliff Bentz from up in Oregon, grew up in a cattle ranching family, serves a rural district, is a recovering water attorney himself. So I couldn't be happier than to have you here with the hearing today. And my colleagues from throughout the Valley, look at your Central Valley Conference. Look who's representing you in Congress today. And I couldn't be happier than to have each one of you here today, side by side, fighting for water, fighting for common sense. But the implications of this hearing go far beyond the Central Valley. We see the crux of it right here. We see the parched fields. We'll hear today about the strained communities, the human health issues of turning our South Valley into a thermal dust bowl. We will hear today about many of the opportunities to correct this. We have projects. We have the South Folsom Canal project we'll talk about, very low impact environmental project that could lead to tremendous relief of our water scarcity. We're going to talk about dredging. We're going to talk about how we operate our Bureau of Reclamation dams. We wish they were here to talk about it with us, but they're not. So we're going to have a discussion regardless. We're going to talk about dredging of the Delta, dredging of the rivers, and then we're going to talk about endangered species accountability. Some high-level notes. We have, in the far chart you can see there, we've gone from blue to deep red, way down at the bottom there in the far orange bars, and we cannot count an additional salmon. We cannot count an additional smelt. We cannot count any recovery of the target species in the delta or rivers of California. But nonetheless, we can count up parched, previously irrigated landscapes in our urban areas. We can count up parched farming landscapes throughout the valley here. We can count up the lack of water being delivered to our wetland estuaries and our true biodiversity opportunities here in California across the board. And we can look at our subsiding soils, our subsiding freeways, infrastructure, and canals because we are overdrafting our aquifers, all to not recover the stated species. We're going to hear about some endangered species outcomes also, as well as improved methods for operating our dams. This isn't just a Central Valley problem. Water scarcity in California and water scarcity in the arid West, the Bureau of Reclamation was formed in the 1930s to address this, is causing intolerable housing costs throughout the western United States. If you're in Phoenix, if you're in LA, if you're in San Francisco, if you're anywhere in the arid west of the Rockies, you are seeing your housing costs go through the roof. Families are suffering higher food costs, higher farming costs. Now, we can relate this easily. A really wise creator put the largest precipitation bank in the world, the Pacific Ocean, right off the largest watershed in the world. That's the Sierra Nevada Mountains. And below it put the largest, most fertile valley in the world with a Mediterranean climate. This should have been the Western Hemisphere's Garden of Eden. And it has been. We flew over a great deal of it today. But it's not doing everything it can do. And only the misguided environmental extremists and the politics of Washington, D.C. and California could screw up this setting and hurt what it should be helping with no positive outcomes whatsoever. So we're going to take that to task today, but our spirit is one of collective failure. We just pledged the flag. These are all results of our constitutional government. We've been told at agriculture over the years, if we're not at the table, we're on the table. We've got to come to the table, make a compromise. We've got to help solve these problems. We're a large water user, so the solution lies with us in our cooperation. And we have cooperated on down the steps over there. But we still haven't solved the problems, and we're still being come to for more and more water without any remote accountability of what ends that water taken off of our farms and out of our communities delivers. So we're going to have a discussion today about accountability, about policy, and about the impacts not only on the farms, but also throughout our communities and throughout the arid West, where home prices are too high, power is too expensive, and the loss of jobs is creating an affordability crisis that many families cannot pilot through right now. So thank you very much again to all of the participants and all of you who took time out of your day today to attend this hearing. These are important issues. There's nothing more important. Every advanced society we talk about in the world, every historic society we talk about in the world, found a way to harness its water resources, from Egypt to the Aztecs to the Nile River to America and previously California. So we're going to get back to that spirit and see if we can improve humanity through common sense. Shouldn't be novel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you. Thank you, and thank you for inviting us to your wonderful community. I'll now introduce our witnesses, Mr. Jason Phillips, Chief Executive Officer of the Freant Water Authority, Ms. Allison Febo, General Manager of Westlands Water District, Ms. Rhonda Lucas, Attorney for Lucas Law, Mr. William Bordeaux, Founder and CEO of Bordeaux Farms, Mr. John Herrick, General Counsel and Manager of the South Delta Water Agency, Mr. Josh Weimer, Director of External Affairs of the Turlock Irrigation District. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, you must limit your oral statements to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. We use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. And at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I'll ask you to please complete your statement. I'll also allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. I now recognize Mr. Phillips for 5 minutes. Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman Bentz and members of the subcommittee. I am Jason Phillips, CEO of the Freant Water Authority. Freant operates and maintains the Freant-Kern Canal and advocates on behalf of the Freant Division and East Side communities. Thank you again for holding this timely and important field hearing. Regulatory decisions and legislative inaction are forcing us towards water scarcity, away from water abundance. And so starting in the early 1900s, unelected officials began to force change to how water is managed in California, and not for the better. And it just keeps getting worse. These decisions have been taking water away from farms and communities in increasing quantities, yet have made no discernible change to help in the decline of species populations. I want you to consider this. Unelected officials at regulatory agencies are delegated the responsibility for being the final decision makers on one of the most significant public policy issues we face in the state of California, and that's how to best allocate the state's limited water resources. I'll give you a quick example. The 2019 biological opinion that was done, it was on the bar chart up there toward the far right under the Trump administration. was the first time in the last 3 decades that a regulatory change would have improved the reliability of our project. Unfortunately, that 2019 biological opinion was litigated by environmental groups and the state of California, and instead of defending the work that was done, one of the first acts of the current federal administration in 2021 was to scrap the work and start over. The new biological opinion will continue the trend of the past several decades and take an overly conservative approach to ESA compliance and further reduce the ability to deliver contract water. All of these reductions in surface water deliveries have a ripple effect through the management of water in the San Joaquin Valley. For example, increased reliance on groundwater overdraft now has exacerbated the impacts to drinking water systems and land subsidence, causing damage to the Bryant Kern Canal, also the Delta Mendota Canal, California Aqueduct, and has compromised their ability to now deliver surface water to where it needs to go. If a pattern of using environmental regulations to continually reduce or eliminate the ability to deliver contract water, if that doesn't change, we will never really be able to declare the drought over. Even if we get another good winter next year, or even a series of good winters, we will not be able to declare the drought over. The time is overdue to have additional congressional oversight, direction, and accountability in how the water system in California is regulated. Taking the approach of conserving our way to sustainability will most certainly create a zero-sum game of moving water from agriculture to other demands, and within the next decade, it will result in the largest reduction of productive farmland this country has seen in more than a generation. Legislative changes, including to the Endangered Species Act, are desperately needed. Any future reallocations of water resources to meet environmental goals must be approved by elected members that the public elects to represent them. So infrastructure solutions are also important. I want to address that. Investments to improve and develop new infrastructure are also essential. For example, restoring the Bryant Kern Canal and Delta Mendota Canal and California Aqueduct capacities are essential to be able to deliver our project water. We talk a lot about additional surface water and groundwater storage and must remain a priority, no doubt. But to be clear, without regulatory reform to stop the uncontrolled, unending taking of California's water supplies in pursuit of the proven failed approach to recover endangered species, there is no amount of new infrastructure, recycling, efficiency, or any other form of water supply development that can bring us to a place of abundance. It's literally impossible. Without this reform, the only plausible outcome will be a level of farmland retirement in the next decade that we have not seen in our lifetimes. So to conclude, we stand prepared to work with the subcommittee and the federal and state administrations to put common sense back into the equation regarding the effective management of our water resources. I believe Bryant is particularly well positioned to provide technical, policy, and legal input to decision makers at all levels of our government. And I want to again thank the subcommittee for traveling to the Valley to hold this critical hearing and for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to working with you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Febo for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bentz and members of the subcommittee, and thank you for having me here to testify. I'm honored to testify on behalf of Westlands Water District as General Manager of the Water District. I'm here to convey a message of urgency. The growers within our district are facing a crisis from an unreliable water supply which continues to erode in both certainty and in volumes. When our growers are in crisis, the members of our communities that support agriculture are also in crisis. Westlands is the largest agricultural water district in the United States by irrigable acres at 620,000 acres approximately. We're located in the west side of Fresno and Kings counties. We have some of the most fertile soils in the world, and we can grow around 60 crops. Some of those can't be grown anywhere else in the world. The crops we produce have a value of over $2 billion and generate more than $4.7 billion in farm-related economic activity. We support over 35,000 jobs and benefit local, traditionally underserved communities in the San Joaquin Valley. The lifeblood of our district and the way that we are able to generate this agriculture is our CVP water supply contract. With acknowledgement of the value of our water resources, we take stewardship of our water resources seriously. We are highly efficient with a fully underground distribution system. We are fully metered above ground and below ground. And we have meters on all our surface water wells with high efficiency drip irrigation systems. The crisis we're facing is the continual erosion of our water supply from the Bureau of Reclamation and the Bureau of Reclamation's lack of ability to deliver our supply due to both changing hydrology, due to a changing climate, compounded with the myriad complex and often incongruent regulations. This has led to an average of over 220,000 acres of land in Westlands fallowed on an average basis. The changing climate leads to a drier and longer dry periods of drought and then wetter and faster wet periods. And those serve as a challenge to the efficiency and effectiveness of the Central Valley Project, which was designed for a historical climate condition. Our infrastructure desperately needs improvements and maintenance, including additional capacity and storage to manage our resources effectively. Compounding our infrastructure challenges are challenges with the regulations that Jason was just referring to. We're almost 50 years into regulations in the Delta that began with Water Right Decision D-1485 and continued through CVPIA, updates to the State Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan for compliance with the Clean Water Act, and biological opinions to ensure compliance with the Endangered Species Act. Not only have these regulations lacked any resulting benefits, but the layers of regulations involved several different regulating agencies at both state and federal levels, leading to confusion and a lack of nimbleness and flexibility when applying those regulations. This year is a perfect example where our allocation in a fairly normal, good hydrologic year started at a 15% allocation for our agricultural communities and was only increased to 50% in June, long after cropping decisions have been made. The bureaucracy of implementing these regulations led to confusion and slow and unclear decision-making. I believe no one entity is to blame, but I also believe that this is indicative of a broken water supply system that must be fixed urgently. We have opportunities to make improvements now. We are currently updating our biological opinions and water quality control plan and have the opportunity now to make decision-making processes more flexible, adaptable, transparent, and most importantly, effective. We have opportunities to invest in infrastructure improvements to provide more flexible infrastructure, including adding conveyance, groundwater storage, below groundwater storage. All of these investments are daunting. It seems every project has $1 billion price tag or more. And so we're going to need partnerships and help investing in this infrastructure. Finally, we have opportunities for legislative leadership to ensure the long-term viability of agriculture in Westlands Water District and the Central Valley. Now's the time to take action, and I look forward to working with you in the future. And thank you for coming to the Central Valley to learn about our district and our area and the importance of agriculture here.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Lucas for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bentz, Congressman Duarte, and esteemed members of the committee. Thank you for providing me with the opportunity to testify on the opportunities and challenges in California concerning water abundance. My name is Rhonda Lucas, and I am an attorney with decades of experience in California water and environmental issues. This career path, while rewarding, frankly, was not the one I envisioned. First and foremost, I am a farmer's daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter. And I wanted nothing more than to return home to the Sacramento Valley and farm alongside 3 generations of my family. You see, more than a century ago, my great-grandparents immigrated to California and became laborers on a small dairy. Through hard work, they were able to buy that dairy and begin writing their American dream. As regulations in the dairy industry began to squeeze dairies out of existence, we converted our family farm to growing other crops. Over time, my grandfather and then father were able to expand our land and ensure future generations would be able to continue farming. However, reality interfered in the form of numerous fish listings under the Endangered Species Act in the early through mid-1990s, resulting in our water being shut off and altering my dream and career path. Rather than coming home to farm, I traded a tractor for a law degree in the hope of making change. Sadly, I am not unique or special. My story is the story of too many in this country whose history, dreams, heritage, and livelihoods have been built around a life calling, only to have these legacies threatened unnecessarily by unelected bureaucrats who choose water scarcity and permanent drought conditions that wreak havoc but produce little to no actual improvements to fish populations or the environment. Less than a decade ago, the area we are in today, and you all traveled, was brought to its knees because bureaucrats chose to use biological opinions to impose drought conditions. The nightly news was filled with stories of food banks being inundated with hardworking families who faced unemployment, poverty, and hunger. As the crops died and the land dried up, the instances of asthma, and particularly for the children and the elderly, exploded. Instances of domestic violence, petty crime, divorce, depression, anxiety, and suicide also increased. The water flowed not into the fields and communities to sustain life, but out to the ocean on the off chance it might somehow increase fish populations. By choosing regulatory drought in the name of ESA without care of consequence, more than crops died, people died, dreams died, communities died, and hope died. And the fish did not improve demonstrably. Last week, I dropped my youngest off to college, and sadly, the same listed species that altered my dream are still being used a generation later as an excuse to impose water shortages on communities without foreseeable recovery or any measurable benefit to either the communities or the environment. The people on the Columbia River Basin are living it right now, more than 40 years. Over 9 billion federal tax dollars expended, devastation upon communities, and the salmon and steelhead are no closer to recovery. As we approach the 51st birthday of the Federal Endangered Species Act, one thing is perfectly clear. This well-intentioned act is failing miserably. Congress's main objective, in achieving Congress's main objective. Instead of recovering species, it is destroying our communities and threatening our nation's food supply. By any reasonable measure, the government has failed to achieve Congress's goals. Albert Einstein once observed, quote, "God doesn't play dice with the universe," end quote. If we continue allowing bureaucrats to play dice with the universe under the guise of ESA, who is going to feed, clothe, and house our next generation? We must have science, we must have accountability, and we must have accountable, demonstrable, and measurable recovery goals. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Bordeaux for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bentz and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is William Bordeaux. I'm a farmer on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley, a United States Marine Corps veteran, a water district director, a former Kalinga City Council member, and concerned citizen. I'm here today to address the critical challenges posed by current water management practices, not just on California farms, but on the broader community and nation. This issue transcends agriculture. It affects families, public health, and the American dream. Agriculture is more than just an industry in the San Joaquin Valley. It's the lifeblood of our communities, providing jobs, supporting local businesses, and sustaining families. The Bureau of Reclamation's delays and overly conservative approach to water allocations this year have had far-reaching and devastating consequences. Despite historic rainfall and snowpack, the Bureau's allocation announcements failed to account for the abundance, issuing a minimal allocation that did not reflect the actual conditions. By the time a modest increase was announced, it was too late for growers to adjust their plans for the year. These delays impact not just farms, but the entire agricultural supply chain, including buyers and processors who need reliable water supply forecasts to secure their operations. For example, garlic packers plant from September to October for harvest the following year, and tomato processors finalize commitments by January for the upcoming summer. When water announcements are delayed until March or later, these stakeholders cannot adjust, resulting in lost contracts, idle equipment, and job losses. The ripple effect extends throughout our community, threatening the stability of our local economies and that depend on agriculture. The impact of inadequate water supply extends far beyond the fields. It hits our communities at their core. As farmers struggle, local economies suffer. The reduction in agricultural activity means fewer jobs and less income circulating in the community, which directly affects local businesses, schools, and public services. We are seeing increased respiratory illnesses due to poor air quality, exacerbated by the dust from fallowed fields and a lack of healthy crops that would otherwise clean the air. This places additional strain on already overburdened healthcare facilities, stretching communities' resources to their limits. As public safety budgets shrink and essential community services are cut, the social fabric of our communities begin to fray. Families who work the land face financial uncertainty, leading to stress, deteriorating mental health, and loss of hope. This collapse of community is not just an economic issue, it's a human crisis. The erosion of the American dream is felt most acutely by those who have worked hard to achieve it, only to see it slipping away due to factors beyond their control. The scarcity of water caused by mismanagement is not just a problem for farmers, it's a problem for everyone. When farmers cannot produce at full capacity, the supply of domestic grown food decreases, leading to higher food prices for all Americans. This man-made water scarcity artificially inflates the cost of basic food items, disproportionately affecting low-income families and the most vulnerable members of our society. It forces consumers to pay more at the grocery store, compounding financial stress on households already struggling with inflation and uncertainty. Moreover, the increased dependence on imported food due to reduced domestic production is not only a threat to our national security, but also undermines self-sufficiency. It makes us vulnerable to global supply chain disruptions and external market forces, further driving up prices and decreasing the affordability of fresh, nutritious food for American families. The reality is that we have the potential for water abundance. Proper management and transparent, timely water allocations could provide ample supply to support our agricultural needs and sustain our communities. The Bureau of Reclamation must be held accountable for ensuring that water allocations are based on accurate, up-to-date data on precipitation, snowpack, and storage levels, rather than defaulting to overly conservative approaches that hurt those who depend on this vital resource. We must move away from the narrative of scarcity towards a vision of abundance, where the need for farmers, communities, and consumers are met through thoughtful and proactive water management. This is not just about securing water for crops. It's about securing a future where families can thrive, communities can grow, and the American dream remains within reach for all. In closing, I urge this committee to recognize the challenges we face with water management are not just about agriculture. They're about people, communities, and our collective future. We need a commitment to responsible water management that ensures a reliable and abundant supply for all who depend on it. We have the resources and the opportunity to turn this around, to restore hope and opportunity for the San Joaquin Valley and beyond. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to working together to protect our farms, our communities, and the American dream. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Herrick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, I appreciate your attendance here and your interest in the problems we're facing. My name is John Herrick. I'm council and manager of South Delta Water Agency. Sadly, I've been doing this for 30 years, and we're facing the exact same problems that we faced when I started. Just as a little background, my father was in ag his whole life, and his last job was as the manager of a 20,000-acre farm west of Bakersfield. So I think I have a sort of unique perspective of both the Delta interests and the export interests. But I'm here today to discuss the problem we're dealing with in the South Delta, which is the degradation of the system to the point where there's going to be a catastrophe and the system won't work anymore. We used to think that high flows in wet years would move most of the silt out of the system and slowly move it towards the bay and the ocean. About 20 years ago, 10 years ago, we started noticing that that wasn't the case. And I think we've reached a tipping point whereby now all of the silt that comes down the San Joaquin River stays in the South Delta. And that became apparent in 1998 when I got a call from one of the farmers. He said, John, there's no water in Old River. Old River is one of our main channels. And so I said, well, there's water in Old River. And he says, no, there's no water in Old River. So I went out there and looked at it, and the channel was virtually dry. There was about 2 inches of water across the channel from where his diversion was. There was a little hole of water around his diversion point, and the water was flowing from that over to the other side of the channel. The channel was dry. That started my re-emphasis of my efforts for the South Delta. And so the examples I've given you in my testimony, I'll go through quickly here. One of them deals with Dowdy Cut. I'm not trying to test anybody's knowledge of the Delta's geography. Dowdy Cut is one of the channels through which the tidal flows move upstream, and of course, moving upstream then fill the rest of the channels with the water that comes in. Dowdy Cut has gone from a place where we noticed a sandbar to a place where we now see an island blocking the channel. The bathymetry that we've done over the past few years shows that it's no longer 8 feet deep, it's 1 to 2 feet deep in some places. So that's a huge difference in the volume of water that moves up on the tide. And it comes, the issue comes home because Pescadero Reclamation District's source of water is fed by that Dowdy Cut. And this last summer, they had extreme low water levels in their channel because the amount of water on the tide is 1/10 of what it used to be. And so rather than operating at full operation, which they should normally be able to do in the Delta, they sometimes were at 33% of their diversion needs. This was during the time when we had those record heat wave when we had temperatures up to 113 in the area. So as you can imagine, the farmers were screaming at the manager there, and they were yelling at me about there's no water in the channels. Well, there's no answer to that. So we tried to get through that, and they're still trying. The second example is Middle River, which again is one of our main channels. And for 20 years, we've been noticing the silt slowly building up, and there are diversions along Middle River that can't always operate. Sometimes they operate, at half capacity, but that wears out the pumps. Sometimes they can't operate. Last November, I got a video from one of the farmers who was trying to operate a place called Undine Road over Middle River. His pump is there. And he sent me the video, and it showed a channel that was not 30 feet wide and 4 to 6 feet deep. It showed a channel that was 3 feet wide and 6 inches deep. That means there was virtually no water in that channel. It looked like a public sewer drain. It was nowhere near a river. Now, off of Middle River, approximately, 20,000 acres of farmland. Pescadero from Dowdy Cut is about 6,500 acres of farmland. Those are just two of the areas. So we're facing a degradation of the system that will prevent water from flowing, no matter whether it's tidal water, downstream flow of the Sacramento River water, transfer water going from other places. It creates a huge problem. To bring it home in numbers, there's a project currently going on the San Joaquin River just upstream of our part of the Delta. It's still in the Delta. And the engineers for that project noticed that last year, 250,000 cubic yards of silt accumulated in that one spot. Now turn that into the whole South Delta area, and you can see that millions of cubic yards of additional silt ended up there. The last thing I want to say is the analysis of all the programs that we're trying to do are done with computer models, and I've given you an example there where the computer model thinks the channels look like they did 20 years ago, and they don't look like that now, which means the analyses we're using for all of our planning and all of our projects are wrong. With that, I look forward to working with you in the future, and I hope we can find the effort and the money to do things the right way, because as the previous people have said, we've gained no ground on improving the situation in the last generation or two. No ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Weimer for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Josh Weimer with the Turlock Irrigation District, and thank you for the invitation to testify about TID's industry-leading reservoir and watershed management. As a way of background, TID is the oldest irrigation district in the state of California, formed back in 1887. And we provide irrigation water to about 5,000 growers who irrigate 150,000 acres. And we also provide retail electricity to about 250,000 people. We are governed by a 5-member locally elected board of directors, and we are not part of the state or federal water project. We are locally owned and locally operated. We get our water from the Tuolumne River. And along with our partners on the river, the Modesto Irrigation District, we have built a series of conveyance and storage projects on that river, most notably the Don Pedro project. Don Pedro is a 2 million acre foot reservoir and also provides 200 megawatts of carbon-free electricity for our customers. And Don Pedro is also the sole flood control responsible agency for the Tuolumne River. And over the course of our 137 years of operation, one theme has stayed consistent over the entire time, is that necessity has driven innovation. That was clearly the case during the formation of the district when we brought irrigation water to the people, from the construction of our first water project in 1893 and to entering the electric business 100 years ago. And importantly, that necessity led to TID's investment and commitment to reservoir management and technology following the devastating floods across Northern California in 1997. In 1997, there was no detailed hydrological modeling, forecasting, or intelligence that allowed operators to mitigate impacts from flooding. We were completely reactionary. The Tuolumne River downstream of Don Pedro has a very limited channel capacity of 10,000 CFS. In 1997, the peak flow into Don Pedro was 180,000 CFS. We had no clue what weather was coming, and we had no idea that we needed to create space in the reservoir to prevent from downstream flooding. Immediately following the flood, TID committed to never being in that situation again and sought out the leading experts in hydrological analysis and research at Stanford to create a Tuolumne-specific hydrological operations model. HFAM is the first hourly and physically based hydrological model to use for water operations in the state of California. Our model breaks down our watershed into over 800 land segments that factors in soil type, rock formations, tree density, and then we input precipitation, temperature, wind, solar radiation for each land segment. All of those inputs then provide us with information on soil moisture, snowpack, and runoff in the watershed for each land segment. HFAM is a central hub for our operations, and since that initial investment 25 years ago, we have dedicated annual resources to calibration and to building out that model to fine-tune our operation. We have partnered with NASA on ASO snow surveys, with Scripps on atmospheric river research, and all of those new data sets are incorporated into the model and provide more accuracy, removing virtually all uncertainty in water operations. 2023 showed the full extent of advanced reservoir operations. We were coming out of the third driest 3 years in history and preparing for the 4th year of a drought. But within the course of 24 hours, we went from drought planning to flood control releases. Don Pedro had 800,000 acre feet of space available, and we knew with certainty because of our investments in technology that months down the road we would have more water than we could store, and we began making pre-flood releases with a reservoir that was half full. While others were filling the reservoir to recover from the drought, we were able to pass hundreds of thousands of acre feet before they started making flood releases, which reduced downstream flooding. The certainty from the modeling and forecasting allowed us to run at max channel capacity for 70 straight days, and it allowed us to pass 2 million acre feet of water through Don Pedro without any downstream flooding. And these flood releases also allowed our electric side of the house to offset over $20 million in natural gas purchases for our power plants by running more hydro because of this technology. These investments allow TID to maximize the current system that we have for water supply reliability, flood control, for groundwater recharge, hydro generation, and environmental purposes. We believe that embracing new technology, especially technology that doesn't require any more concrete, is the first and the lowest hanging fruit for better reservoir operations. TID stands ready to work with other reservoir managers in California, whether that's federal or state or other entities, to provide lessons learned and key findings from our experiences. Thank you for the invitation to testify in front of the committee, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I thank the witnesses for their testimony, and I will now recognize members for 5 minutes each for questions. I'm going to warn the panel we're going to do 2 rounds of questions. So just because you get through the first 5 minutes from each one of us, there'll be another 5 minutes for each. So we're going to start with Congressman McClintock for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, I chaired this subcommittee for several years, and what I learned in those years came down to this. Droughts are nature's fault. They happen. But water shortages are our fault. That's a deliberate choice that we made starting in the 1970s when we imposed laws that made the construction of new reservoirs endlessly time-consuming and ultimately cost-prohibitive. We're not going to solve our water shortages until we build more reservoirs, and we won't build more reservoirs until we fundamentally change these laws and the policymakers who are responsible for them. Twice in this last decade, we've seen historic droughts followed by record rainfall. But because we don't have the capacity to store excess water from wet years, we suffer catastrophic shortages in dry ones. And now, as you've just testified, even in wet years, farmers are being choked off of their water. Mr. Phillips, you said this was a simple choice between scarcity and abundance. Who's responsible for that choice, and what do we do about it?
Thank you, Congressman McClintock, and thank you for the question. I believe that the responsibility is back on Congress, and the reason I say that is because a sentence that was in my testimony that I wanted you to consider very carefully, that unelected officials at regulatory agencies have been delegated the responsibility for being the final decision makers on how we allocate water resources. So they are continuing to do that. They are the ones building reservoirs by taking our existing ones like Shasta and building from the bottom up, dedicating all of the space to their purposes, and we can no longer use it for the existing purposes. And as long as that happens and that trend continues,
don't forget, Shasta was built to 600 feet of elevation. It's designed to be 800 feet. That's missing 200 feet, which that generation left to our generation to fulfill, would mean another 9 million acre feet of water storage on the Sacramento system. Everybody thinks the Colorado is the great river in the United States. It's a pygmy compared to the Sacramento. Sacramento's flow is almost twice as much. The difference is we store 60 million acre feet on the Colorado, we store about 11 million feet on the Sacramento, and we lose all of the rest of that to the ocean every year. In 1959, the legislature passed the Burns-Porter Act. That included a water bond of $1.75 billion. You do the inflation adjustment, that's about $19 billion in today's money. And with that $19 billion in today's money, we built 10 storage dams, 11 ancillary dams that store 7 million acre feet of water, that generate 3,000 megawatts of hydroelectricity. And with what was left over, we built the California Aqueduct. Now, since 2000, California voters have approved $27 billion in water bonds, all promising to enhance California's water supply. And in fact, there's another $10 billion bond on the November ballot, and yet not a single major reservoir has been built in California since the new Malones in 1979. And so we face a situation where one of the most water-abundant regions of our country suffers chronic water shortages, even in years of record rainfall. Mr. Weimer, it should be obvious that this crisis isn't a shortage of water, or for that matter, a shortage of money. So what is it?
From TID's perspective, it's a lack of investment in technologies and up-to-date science and data to drive water operations.
Well, it's more than that, though. I mean, it's a lack of will to build new storage, is it not? I mean, we don't lack new storage. Just completing Shasta to its design elevation is 9 million acre feet of additional water. Finishing the Auburn Dam, for which we cut the footings a generation ago, would be another 2.1 million acre feet of water. Would that not solve our water shortages if we had the will to use that water for the benefit of the human population?
We definitely need the will to build more storage and to capture the water when it's available, and that's something that at the local level, being locally owned and operated, that we're able to do.
Mr. Bordeaux, you're a farmer. Surface water storage is the cheapest possible way to produce water. Desalination remains by far the most expensive way, yet the left is actually tearing down existing dams, dumping that water into the ocean, and then telling us we're just going to have to pay $3,000 an acre foot or more so that we can reclaim a little bit of the water from the ocean that we've just dumped into it. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, it might if you live in a metropolitan area on the coast, but farmers in my region need surface deliveries.
What would $3,000 per acre foot of water do to your operation?
You go out of business.
And let me ask you this. If we're raising the costs of farmers, what does that do to the cost of groceries?
They skyrocket, and not just by the cost of our water, but all the underlying costs of doing business here in the state of California.
Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize Congressman LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this gathering here and being able to delve in such an important topic here that's been truly underemphasized in our legislative efforts, not from the people in this room, but in Congress, as well as what's going on in Sacramento. So I represent the 1st District of California, the top of the state. I'm adjacent to Mr. Bentz, who's across the border from me up there. We have a lot in common, including one aspect is the Klamath River and the Upper Klamath Lake. That lake was enhanced by what's known as the Klamath Project there, which there's much more additional water that was made available by that project, and the hydroelectric dams farther downstream have made clean hydroelectric power. Mr. McClintock was referring to that a moment ago, available that everybody wants CO2-free power, right? And those dams have since, right now, are being removed to the detriment of the actual habitat and the fish population they claim to be saving. The devastation caused by the release of an estimated 20 million cubic yards of silt up and down that river with the 4 dams that were removed. They're pretty much all out now. You should see the photographs of and the videos of the water going down that stream. You should see the other data there, such as a person I know is taking samples each day of that water and water quality. The water's running about 70, 71, 72 degrees, which is a lot hotter than salmon want. And you can't even see through it there. It looks like one of those health drinks my wife makes for me for breakfast in the morning sometimes, that dark green. It's awful. Yet here we go. The drink is good. Don't let that get back up north. So here we are, bad science informing a bad outcome. And so I want to commend especially what Ms. Lucas was saying. They're very compelling firsthand testimony you made on what that feels like to you, what it is for you here. And I wanted to just throw the question out here, though. When I have in my neighborhood, the Shasta Dam, Lake Oroville, combined 8 million acre feet of storage, the proposed Sites Reservoir, which is moving along. I like to joke, I guess, that the Great Lakes were formed by glaciers. Well, this project is moving along at glacial pace 2, has been talked about for 50 years. Another 1.5 million acre feet available if we could build that. So, Mr. Phillips, I appreciate your comments, and Ms. Febo as well. Storage like sites in Shasta, we're talking about delta tunnels and all these things. I mean, just talk about the expansion of supply, what that means, and how the equation starts working better for all of us up and down Sacramento Valley and San Joaquin Valley. First, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you. Yes, more storage. When we have years like 2023 and flows going everywhere, we need places to put the water, and sites would be one of those places. Raising Shasta would be helpful, and there's a lot of good storage projects. I think what I would want you all in the audience to just be aware of from my perspective now, not quite as long as Mr. Herrick, but 24 years, is it is clear to me that if we have unelected officials having unending amounts of ability to take water, they'll take it from sites, they'll take it from whatever we build, it will go. We have to stop that and build the projects. But if we don't feel like just building these projects is going to get us to the garden spot if we don't fix the way that regulatory changes are made.
Well, certainly, I'm appalled how San Luis Reservoir was operated this year. Last year it was full, and I'm rooting for you just as hard down here to fill that, even though I can't get any of the water as far north. We need this all to happen. And I thank you for mentioning the Shasta Dam raise another 630,000 acre feet just for a quick and dirty 18-foot raise, not the whole 200 Tom was talking about. Ms. Febo, talk about that a little bit too, please, and then some of the bit we were discussing earlier with fish and wildlife, for example. And
Sure. So I agree with Jason that regulations and infrastructure both need to be modified. I do believe that adding storage does create more flexibility for the system and allows more flexible water management, which results in more water supplies. So we have more knobs to turn, basically. San Luis Reservoir this year has been extremely frustrating in terms of its operation. The San Luis Reservoir was originally intended to be a fill and spill reservoir, or not fill and spill, it's fill and drain. So you fill in the winter, and then in the summer, when the demands are high, you drain that reservoir and bring it down as far as you can. And this year we're looking out and we're seeing it at above 400,000 acre feet, which is a couple of 100,000 acre feet higher than it needs to be at this point. So we see that as really a waste of water that could have been allocated, and if by chance next year is wet, that will just be spilled out into the ocean.
all right, thank you. I better withdraw. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes Mr. Valadeo for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Congressman Duarte, for hosting this. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. Obviously, water is something that's vital for all of us here across the valley. I'm going to direct this question first to Ms. Vibo, but I want everyone else to follow up if they have anything they want to add to it. We're all familiar with the administration's decision to override the biological opinions established in 2019, the ones that were started under President Obama and finished under President Trump. I recently led the California Republican delegation in a letter to U.S. Bureau of Reclamation denouncing their latest draft of the new biological opinions, as they seem to prioritize the needs of a couple specific species above all else. Above our communities, above our farmers, and even above our other environmental and wildlife impacts. Do you and your stakeholders have concerns with the new draft BIOPS? And if so, what concerns you the most?
We absolutely have concerns with the new draft biological opinions. When you see this squeeze of regulation chart that's over there, you can see that the 2018-19 BIOPS actually resulted in the first in decades increase in water supply, a small amount, but it's a baby step. And we believe, and the agencies at that time believed, that that was the best available science and a operation that did not result in jeopardy of fish species. And so when there was an effort to modify those and open up the consultation of the biological opinions, we were really concerned about why you would need to do that when there was just recently biological opinions developed on best available science with a non-jeopardy opinion. We are reviewing the new biological opinions. It's a confusing mess of 23,000 pages of information that we're trying to review between the opinions and the environmental documentation. There's a lot of questions about how the operations are actually going to work and how they fit together. And really, at this point, we don't have a clear picture of what those opinions are concluding or what they're offering out.
I don't know if Mr. Phillips or Mr. Dro or any of the others.
I would add that they were overturned for political reasons, and they were also overturned because they could be. And we should just take note that they will continue to redo in the future, every few years, unless it changes, and they're not able to do that, they will continue to do that.
I'm very concerned, and something as important as this shouldn't be used as a political pawn. Also, shouldn't be rushed to get done before the next administration. And so it's the height of mismanagement and inappropriate use of their power. And and what's really the big tragedy is I don't think it's going to help the environment.
I echo all of the comments my fellow speakers have had and would like to add that from a legal perspective, it's an absolute travesty. This science is really political science, and unfortunately, the way the Endangered Species Act is currently being implemented, the law requires best available science. But the agencies, the unelected bureaucrats, get to dictate what that science is, and that is driving all of our problems. Congress implemented the Data Quality Act many years ago, and it's been virtually ignored. It sets true standards for what science is. It requires economic benefit analysis, and it gets us out of this political science volleyball that is leading to the devastation and doing no good for the species. Water is too scarce to waste, but the unelected bureaucrats get to waste it every day on the hope that maybe another generation from now we might see recovery, but if not, that's okay. We'll just get more water.
All right, and I think that was important to mention because I think, Mr. Phillips, you mentioned in your talking points or in your about the amount of fish that have been saved. Has there been any? And with this fish, how many acres are we losing potentially with these species that haven't recovered? You mentioned that there's a farmland requirement as retirement, possibly. Any idea what that number of acreage could be?
So the amount of water, just if you look at the chart over there on the west side, from 100% to where we are today, is well over 1 million acre feet per year, and that's not to take into account the rest of California. It's millions of acre feet. The trajectory of the salmon are going down. Other species that are extinct are going down. So it's hard to say that it's benefiting.
So there's no evidence to even support that species have recovered with all the economic damage that has been done?
None. And we're probably well over 1 million acres of farmland that'll have to be retired when we lose our groundwater.
I appreciate it. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. And I was negligent in failing to recognize the Merced County Sheriff Enforcement Team who's here today. Just want to mention that in some of my meetings up in Oregon, we had, shall we say, need for folks to step in from the law enforcement side of things and remove protesters from a previous town hall meeting. And so it's great to have Lieutenant Ray Framstad here, Sergeant Chris Chinton, and Sniper Deputy Sadvar Sohal. And I just want to thank them for their presence today. And would you all give them a round of applause, please? Thank you. Thank you. And with that, Congressman Duarte, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the panelists here, the real dream team here of good friends, a lot of you, and people I've come to respect immensely. So economically, California's got a $33.5 trillion economy. And so if we took 1% of 1 year's GDP for California alone, you'd have a $3.3 trillion economy. You'd have $33 billion to spend on water. It's not absurd. We're spending $100 and some billion on a high-speed rail. So for 1% of 1 year's GDP, I imagine we could have the infrastructure needed for water abundance, but some things don't require infrastructure. They just require common sense. So I'm going to go down the line here, give you each about 30 seconds, whatever you need. Tell me, where would you find some part of that 2 million acre feet of water that we need in California for farms, for homes, for business, for grassland estuaries, for the ecological systems here on Earth, not out in the ocean, doesn't do as much good out there. And I'm going to start with this end of the table because that end of the table has been picked on a lot today. So, Mr. Weimer, please.
Yeah, you'd find it first by utilizing the best technology out there to operate your reservoir system. Water's too scarce of a resource for us to be operating off of tools from the 1950s. We have the technology available for us to maximize and optimize the water resources within the existing footprint. Obviously, technology only gets you so far, and we need new storage and conveyance to be able to take advantage of the flashy systems. And that's why TID and MID filed for floodwater rights 2 years ago to try to capture that water when it's available. But utilizing technology for best reservoir management is the lowest hanging fruit for the entire state.
Let me push for a estimation on your part. If we applied the same technologies and management systems to the Bureau of Reclamation and Army Corps of Engineers operated reservoirs statewide, how many 100,000 million acre feet of water could we achieve on an annual basis?
It's hard to give a number, but to give an example, in 2018, by utilizing this technology, we were able to capture 150,000 acre feet that normally would have had to be released due to an outdated flood control manual. So if you apply that to the significant water systems that the people on this panel deal with, you would expect to see such a large savings.
So a 2 million acre foot reservoir was able to improve its operations for an additional 150,000 acre feet.
In just that year, and we've seen benefits from this technology in every year, whether it's wet or dry.
Thank you. Mr. Herrick, tell me about dredging, not just in the Delta, but some estimation of what dredging could be done in California to allow better flood control, better better river flows, better delta flows, and more efficient water use, and scope what the impact of that might be.
Well, starting with the last part of that, the scope would be tremendous. Silt isn't just building up in the South Delta, it's building up in every reservoir. It's building up in Clifton Court forebay, which is the state project's forebay for getting water. It's building up in all the rivers. And so when you decrease the amount of volume in the channels, you impair everything that you're doing. Flood control, you have less flood control capabilities. You have less transport of water. You have less dilution of water. It's just a monumental impairment that is slowly destroying parts of our system, and our system depends upon the movement of water. So I can't put a number on it, but there are tens of millions of cubic yards of silt that need to be removed, or we're not going to be able to deliver water anywhere, not just the South Delta going out of business,
Okay.
which is likely. But
You're not going to give me numbers. We're going to move on. I realize it's a tough load. William, please, Mr. Bordeaux.
Well, we're trying, it's not because of water supply. Initially, we're trying to raise San Luis Reservoir for safety of dams purposes, but because of that, we're trying to raise it modestly. And I do believe in the user pay system, what some of the congressmen up here believe in that strongly, and so do I. But when we have to move Highway 152 for safety purposes, and the raise is about $1 billion, $500 million is just to move the highway, to make transportation safe. And I don't think that should be on the backs of farmers that are trying to feed the nation, and our margins are very thin, and it makes it cost prohibitive.
Okay, that's the most expensive water. Rhonda, tell me where the cheapest water is.
The cheapest, my apologies. In my opinion, the cheapest water is going back to the basics. As your chart illustrated, we had a good water system. And when it was built, we recognized, because for time in memoriam, at least in California, I apologize, Chairman Benz, I don't know the rest of the Western United States as well, but at least in California, we have a cycle of drought and flood. It is feast or famine in this country, or in this state, and it has not much to do with global warming. So we built a system that, much like our household finances, we knew some years we would get a bonus, and so we take a portion of that bonus and we put it in savings, because in other years we might have crop failure, and we have to rely on that savings to get us through. When you look at your chart, Congressman Duarte, when we were at 100%, we were okay. What changed? Unelected bureaucrats got to repurpose the State Water Project, the Central Valley Project, frankly, Don Pedro, and every other water management system. Go back to common sense and go back to the basics of why we created this water. We can have both. We need to stop letting unelected bureaucrats choose scarcity.
Thank you. And right before I yield back, I will thank all of you for bringing this back to Congress, because I totally agree. It is our job. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Congressman Fong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Congressman Duarte, for pulling us all together. I want to get right into it. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Phillips and go down if anyone has additional comments. But I'm very concerned, and I'm disappointed, of course, that the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration is not here. But they've got a Fall X2 proposal that has the potential to create even more stringent roadblocks for agricultural and municipal water users. So, Mr. Phillips, can you speak to the effect that this Fall X2 proposal will have on your irrigation district and to others, and what this may mean for water users? And then the second question is there a better way to adaptively manage flows without sacrificing water allocations to our nation's most productive agricultural region?
Sure, I'll address Fall X2, which is a fishery agency proposal to take the savings that was talked about and put it out to the ocean. And in this particular time, there's been an abundant amount of science that has shown that this Fall X2, which we had more time, I'd get into the details, but I'll spare it, is not necessary. In fact, the scientists even agree, but now the regulators are tying themselves in knots on, okay, how do we undo it? And 10,000 to 15,000 acre feet a day right now are leaving our system, our storage reservoirs out to the ocean. We could use it next year, but for the fact that they are not able yet, or trying to figure out how to put a stop to this regulation that they imposed and Congress never had a say in, ever.
Ms. Fibo.
Yes, I'll add that the cost could be up to 300,000 acre feet if it's implemented and we have a dry fall. To me, it's about being able to adaptively manage, but not only that, to show that the regulatory agencies are willing to adaptively manage. We are looking at the reconsultation again, and we have the fishery agencies and the project operating agencies saying that they will adaptively manage. And this is a perfect example when we actually have the science that is saying this may not be beneficial. And so this is the time where we need to come together and we need to decide and have the courage to be able to say we're going to try something different and we're going to adaptively manage and we're going to learn from this.
Any other comments from, yes, Ms. Lucas?
Fall X2 is not based on, NIM's proposal for Fall X2 is not based on science. When X2 first came out, it was a concept, it was a hypothesis, and we tested for years trying to release water to move X2, which is the distance where the tidal inundation comes from the Golden Gate Bridge into the Delta. Mr. Herrick's comments about inundation and sedimentation, that water has to get down through the Delta, through all of those channels. So when you layer the science on top of the actual real-world situation in the Delta where the channels are impassable, it is an absolute waste of water, and there's no way we can achieve the objective. Let's hold the unelected bureaucrats to the same standards that we, the farmers, and the agencies are held to when it comes to science, when it comes to hypotheses, and when it comes to results. And it would fail miserably and never get out of the gate.
Mr. Herrick.
Yeah, everybody's being polite here. We've witnessed this for the past 30, 40 years, that the theory of how to recover fishery species is wrong. Now, I can't solve the fishery problem. I think everybody here would like to fish in rivers, right? We all like that. The people who are making the regulations have destroyed the fisheries. Yeah. Let's be honest about that. Nothing they've done has recovered a species. Everything gets worse. So whatever the answer is, and I'm not a fishery guy and I don't advocate for fisheries, what we're doing isn't it. And anybody that's been a participant in the various hearings, which I've been in too many times, you can see that the regulatory people, no offense to them, I know a lot of them, they don't care what anybody else says. You don't have any impact on them. When you show them something, they go, oh, and then they do what they were going to do anyway. Until that system is broken down and rebuilt, we're not going to solve it.
I want to let you answer that question too, but I want to add to a second question to you. You've talked about the use of new technology, ASO, FERO. Why do you believe that the state and federal regulators are not taking into account this valuable information into developing solutions?
I think that the state and federal government are starting to see the benefits of this and starting to slowly move towards that direction of implementing some of this in their watersheds. However, what we can definitely say is that using site-specific science to inform regulations is clearly the best way to go. And we've been relicensing the Don Pedro project for 15 years. We've spent $35 million on 50 site-specific science to inform how we should operate the system. And it's very clear that a combination of flow and non-flow measures will provide the healthier ecosystem that we all want to see. It's abundantly clear through our work, and that is the way that we should move forward. And we shouldn't be utilizing regulations or flow standards that were frankly developed for the Columbia River on the Tuolumne River.
Thank you. I yield back.
I have a quick example of some adaptive management and reconsultation that could have improved the situation dramatically. The steelhead this year were abundant, and because of that, they were ramping down the pumps. And as they did, it didn't improve the situation. So if they could have went and said, you know what, the fish are abundant, why would we throttle back the pumps? It's not impacting the fish. Let's move some water. But they took an overly conservative approach that impacted our water supply dramatically.
Thank you.
Mr. Phillips, you've worked for the Bureau of Reclamation. This is your opportunity to be candid with all of us and tell us what you would change first. No one's going to know about it. I'm just us.
Well, I don't know. I would characterize it what I would change, but when I've been area manager or deputy regional director in the past, my philosophy is the Bureau of Reclamation would not exist but for its responsibility to deliver water to its customers in its full amount. And every single day of their job should be spent trying to do that and not take on the responsibility of other agencies. And so I guess simply put, that's the way I would look at it.
Obviously, I've had occasion up in Oregon to deal with the Bureau on many, many occasions, and it looks as though they're caught in a fairly difficult position fighting their way through NIMS and U.S. Fish and others. How would you recommend that be resolved? I've heard a bunch of solutions, but what's yours?
Well, I think you have to find the level within the administrations that are willing to find solutions. And a lot of times what I found in Klamath, it's not always there in the basin. And make sure that you hold people accountable and hold the regulatory agencies accountable and work it up the chain. But the job at the Bureau should be to advocate to maximize the water deliveries to the project.
I found that accountability is awkward when you're in Congress. Perhaps it works better if you're president, but if we Congress folk can write, a blistering letter, and the gentleman to my left is very, very good at that, and I mean it.
It's therapy.
Yes, well, but I'm not sure how effective that is, other than the therapy part. So, is this? I'm going to shift from you to Ms. Lucas, because you've mentioned several times about the politicalization of the buyout process. I agree completely with you. How would you fix it? Short, and don't resort to vote for someone else. Then somebody blue for president. Tell me your thoughts.
I do believe that there are opportunities. First and foremost, we had a major victory. I would say everybody in the United States, with the Loper-Bright decision that is carving out what nerds like me call Chevron deference. So that's a start.
I'm going to interrupt because we're going to run out of time, but I'm extremely interested in your answer. It seemed to me that the reversal of Chevron was the Full Employment Act for lawyers and, more to the point, federal judges. And so how is it that we're going to be the better for the system now that it's not agencies but instead courts?
The reality is, if Congress could mandate and tie some, you control the purse strings, tie some appropriations to it, that the science that is used, again, look at the Data Quality Act, the science is used will be the same regardless of its source, because what we have now is our agencies, the agencies we represent, invest millions in science, and we submit it through the Section 7 biological opinion, Section 7 consultation process, and they can just ignore it with impunity and then adopt their own science that really isn't science and doesn't meet the same rigors as ours. And they get away with it because the judge had to defer to them. They were the experts. So getting rid of Chevron deference will help that. But what can you do? You can ensure that the Section 7 consultation process cannot turn into a never-ending informality with rope-a-dope, he said, she said, where the bureaucrats get to be both judge, jury, and executioner. There needs to be independence, and the standards that are applied to the agency, whether it's their science or their decisions, should be the same standards and rules we get to live by, and that will level the playing field, because we know how to save these fish and keep water abundant. They're just ignoring it.
I'm glad we have another round of questions, because this deserves more discussion. The obvious observation for all of us watching the taking away of the water from the farmer and moving it to other uses is who pays? And my question to you, I guess people would be, are the environmental organizations in some fashion paying for the water they've taken from you when it comes to O&M, other things? I'm sure they're writing a check somewhere, right?
No, absolutely not.
Should they?
I believe so, yes.
my time is up, but there's another go around, so we'll start with you to my left, Mr. McClintock, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. Mr. Herrick, first, I think you are absolutely right. The environmentalists have devastated the environment of our rivers, and I might add of our forests as well. Just look what they've done at the Klamath. One farmer up there recently observed that there's not a single living creature left in the Klamath River in the wake of the dam destruction up there. He said there's no fish, no turtles, no nothing. It's dead. And then in severe droughts, they routinely require pulse flows, releases of huge amounts of cold water for the sake of the fish. A salmon biologist told me no salmon in its right mind is going to enter a river in a drought. The water's too warm and there's not enough of it. So by doing these huge cold water releases in the middle of the drought, you're tricking the salmon into doing something their own survival instinct is begging them not to do, and it never ends well for them. In fact, dams protect riparian habitats from the environmental ravages of both droughts and floods. And as my colleagues pointed out, we've squandered hundreds of billions of dollars making the environmental situation worse without doing a damn thing to maintain the fish populations. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that observation you made?
Well, I would just agree with it. And again, I'm not a fish advocate, but I've been in all the hearings for the state board for the Bay Delta programs, and it's a virtually useless process if one side is not attackable.
Well, they're ideological zealots. They pay no attention to the public. They pay no attention to the science. They are following a weird kind of religion that has no foundation in science, no foundation in reality, but it makes them feel good for some reason. And certainly that's true of the state board. And that's where, Ms. Lucas, I'd need to push back a little on one observation you made. You keep mentioning unelected bureaucrats being at the heart of the problem. I don't think that is the heart of the problem. We need to remember that every one of those unelected bureaucrats are either appointed by or hired by elected officials who are supposed to be accountable to us. The problem is we don't hold them accountable. I mean, the State Water Resources Control Board is entirely appointed by Governor Newsom. So really, this is a nature versus Newsom debate, and the fault is not with nature. Right now, the State Water Resources Control Board is considering this draconian reduction in water distributed to residential customers now. You're about to have an awful lot of company. The only way they're going to, even in flood years, it doesn't matter the reality of the situation. This is something that makes them feel good. And the only way I can think of for a water agency to do that is to levy cost-prohibitive fines or to jack up the price of water to the point where it's unaffordable in a state that already bears one of the heaviest costs of water in the country, despite the fact we're one of the most water-rich regions of the country. So I guess I have to get back to a simple point, and that is the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. We, the voters, have allowed this to happen. As I said, this is not nature's fault. This is a choice that we made when we elected these imbeciles. Any thoughts?
Right. Without agreeing to some of your personal observations, I would say you make a very valid point. These unelected bureaucrats are accountable to somebody. And with respect to the Water Board, it is Governor Newsom. And with respect to those in charge of National Marine Fisheries Service under NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it is currently the Biden-Harris administration. You are 100% correct. I would say, combining two observations from both you and Chairman Bentz, who bears the cost of this? Every single one of us, and we just don't realize it. The one thing that we at this table and all of our agencies could do is a much better job of simply being honest with our customer base. Mr. Herrick, you and I have sat in many water board hearings over the years, and it's a unique group, but the general public does not know that in passing this regulation, You're not going to have water tomorrow or the next day. You can't turn on the tap. You mentioned the unimpaired flow regime, what the Water Board is currently considering for the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, under the guise of Clean Water Act compliance, by the way. That could remove up to 50% of the water supply in the cities in the Bay Area. They don't even know it.
But the point is, we can change that, all of us together, the moment we summon the political will to do so. Thanks. Thank you. My time's expired.
Concur, and solving the political will involves educating those people so that they know this isn't a free political vote. These people are choosing to cut off your water. Are you okay with that?
Thank you, Mr. Lamalfa. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Chairman Bentz. I really love this conversation, and we have to get down to the reality of it here. And we have people making decisions that don't seem to understand, or if they do, they don't care about our economy, where our food's going to come from, and it needs to come from this place right here. If you watch much of C-SPAN during the congressional speech time, I'm frequently up there with a poster outlining the crops that are grown in California, that the U.S. relies on 90 to 99% of about 25 different crops. There's more than that, but it's all fits on my board, of things that come from, that are grown in this state. And if they're not grown here, they're not grown elsewhere in this country, they have to be imported. You know, take your tomatoes. I try to talk to New Yorkers about that because they understand, you know, pasta and pizza, right? I'm Italian, I can say that. So, but if they're not grown here, they're gonna have to get their tomatoes from Chile or someplace like that, and that's not good. And so I'm trying to make, in my messaging, whatever that's worth, to all Americans that are watching, why California water is important to them. David just reminded me here a minute ago of in the so-called infrastructure bill, they had a specific prohibition in there for funding for raising Shasta Dam. Why are they doing that? Why would they be so obtuse as to say, oh, we just don't want to do that? And under the Trump administration, we were actually up there. I was visiting with them one day. They were taking core samples of what that raise would look like, what it's going to take infrastructure-wise. So, Ms. Lucas, again, I really appreciate your candidness on this, and I wanted to get back with you, and also Mr. Weimer. Also, well, let me do you first on that. On the forecasting, it's called FIRO, right? Were you referring to that a minute ago?
Yeah, FIRO.
Okay,
yes,
because right now the Bureau of Army Corps is using 50-year-old manuals to determine what the water level should be, and I've had them in committee 2-3 years ago. How we doing on getting the FIRO integrated? Like, oh, we're still 3 or 4 more years away from getting that. What the hell are you guys doing? You know, don't you see the urgency of this water supply and being able to better manage our reservoirs? Because we're leaving water basically on the table when we're having to go, oh, we better let the water out until April 1, right? When they could be looking at long-term forecasting using FIRO and say, you know, we could probably crowd another 150,000 acre feet into Lake Oroville, maybe another 200,000 into Shasta or whatever, to and get that much farther into the year. I'm constantly harassing the guys at DWR and BOR, like, you guys are letting the lakes fill, right? Because we're going to need it. And they're reluctantly, I think, try and do things that way. But would you emphasize that a little bit more, Mr. Weimer, on these long-term forecasting and what's Army Corps' delay and et cetera?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congressman. It definitely is something that they're hearing, your comments, they're hearing the examples from the Tuolumne and the Sonoma, and they're seeing what can be done utilizing forecast-informed reservoir operations when you have the flexibility at the local level to then operate that system, right? We didn't have to go through 5 years of study plans. We found this information and started to operate it based off of that. But what you know, the Army Corps, they have 500 dams that they have to do. They're utilizing some of this technology, but what they're doing at the local level, the Sacramento office, they're seeing and agreeing with the technology we're doing and allowing us to operate with this new technology. They understand that, and I think the more examples that we can show at a local level when we own and operate our system, we're showing the rest of the country how the potential of operating systems utilizing new technology. And so I think from our perspective, we're continuing to share and advocate for the utilization of FIRO and for snow surveys to better inform how they operate their entire system.
And save more water.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ms. Lucas, again, you were talking about using science to focus on. I can't see any science going on in the Klamath River they've just destroyed. It's now brown and massive amounts of silt. Heaven knows if you're a constructor or a farmer or miner and you get a little bit of silt in the river, they come after you. They were actually using excavators to dump silt into the river. That's inexplicable to me. They were scooping it out, putting it in the river on the Klamath because they want to nourish the river with silt. It's unbelievable. So talk a little bit more like who are the biological opinionators that are making these opinions, and then you talk like that they're discarding that information when it's presented to them.
As it's currently implemented, there's a long process that gives us a biological opinion or an incidental take statement or a jeopardy finding. Each section under the Act has a similar process, but it all lies with field staff at either the National Marine Fisheries Service, if you are dealing with anadromous, salmonids, and steelhead listings, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for terrestrial and basically all other fisheries or all other species. At the local level, sometimes at a field staff level, the agencies decide. Right now, the way the Act is being interpreted and played out, the agency, National Marine Fisheries Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, their staff decides what science they're going to listen to, what science they're going to accept, and what they're going to disregard, what the biological baseline looks like, and that is critical, right? What is the baseline that we're looking at? What's the universe? And they get to arbitrarily set it. And what they have done by doing that is codified and made permanent all of those reductions. That's our new starting point, because we've codified the baseline and we can't go below that. We need more, which is why, Congressman McClintock, building more storage is fabulous and needed. But if we don't fix that baseline and we don't fundamentally change, who gets to decide what is a take, what is needed for recovery?
If you could bring your comments to.
Absolutely. Then they're just going to take that. So it is field staff within these agencies that nobody bothers to get down to their level and hold them accountable. And they are protected civil servants.
And they don't stand for election every 2 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you again for doing this. I know you've been to California a number of times here in the Valley, and I'm a firm believer in a government closest to the people is the most effective, and this is our opportunity. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to have this. There's 3 open spots here on the dais, and I really wish those folks would have taken some time to be here. I think it's important, again, for them also to be closer to the people and listen to the things that have been said. This question is a question I would have liked to ask Commissioner Touton, but I'll leave it open to all here. When the Bureau of Reclamation is announcing annual allocations to the system south of the Delta, what goes behind these decisions to slowly increase allocation 5 to 10% at a time? When we were coming out of the drought in 2018, allocations eventually got up to 50%. Despite reservoirs higher than those of 2018, we're still stuck at 50%. Why so arbitrary? And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because I do have some follow-up on that as well. Does anyone want to address that quickly? Ms. Febo?
Yeah, so I would say that the reason that we started with such a low allocation and it took a while to get to a higher allocation is really these regulations that we've been talking about and the level of uncertainty and unclarity in how those decisions are made. And so when they're making an allocation, they have to, or they do, assume the worst. And so they're looking forward and they're assuming that all the regulations are going to be the most restrictive, and they just move forward that way. So to me, the solution is really trying to deal with that uncertainty and giving some balance to, we don't know if this is going to work, so is it worth this much water?
And I think Ms. Lucas talked a little bit about this, but if we were not living under all these regulations that have had such an impact on how we divert water, our current amount of infrastructure we have in place today, Shasta and all the different reservoirs that are built today, how would that stack up to our needs as farmers, cities, and the whole population of California? Would we have enough water for the majority of what we do today? Quick.
Well, I'll answer that we would have all been at 100% of our contract allocations probably in January or February.
And that includes some cities that also get water off the system.
A lot of cities. Now, I do believe that we have additional needs in the state, and we have additional projects, and we need to store more wet water. But in terms of the contract water, we would have been at 100% in January.
Not just Friant, every water district?
Friant, West Side, north of Delta, the State Water Project, Southern California.
And that comes back to the point that Mr. LaMaffa brought up that we were talking a little bit, and I know it's been mentioned a lot. Shasta is an 18-foot expansion. Sites Reservoir has been mentioned. That project has been in talks for as long as I've been alive, and I think pretty much everyone on this panel has been alive. It continues to drag out. So the fact that an infrastructure bill is celebrated and dollar amounts are thrown around, it's frustrating because Shasta was excluded. It was something even some of my Democrat colleagues that I think possibly could have been supportive. They act like they didn't know that was specific. But in my water bill, we do bring that back in. But another thing that was brought up was that needs to be talked about is permitting reform. And the fact that it takes that long to build a project, the fact that they've been talking about Sites Reservoir for 60 or 70 years and it still hasn't broken ground, the fact that it took 30 years to expand a simple little reservoir by 10 feet down in Tulare County is frustrating. And I feel like if we were to say that Sites was a football stadium or maybe high-speed rail, they would expedite a lot of the permitting processes. But when it comes to actually something as vital as water for our communities, and it's so frustrating because I have people all across my district showing me pictures, telling me stories about how they've run out of water and no ability to deliver on that. And it's something so simple where we know we have enough infrastructure today, but if we want to take care of the environment, why not work with some of the rules so we can expand those resources and grow our storage and be able to provide for all and actually help? And then the last point is to Mr. Boudreau, the farmer on the panel. When they're telling us at the last minute what you can or how much water you're going to have, do you just go down to the farm supply store and pick up whatever seed is available and everyone's planting the same thing? I mean, you work ground all the same for every single different commodity, right? Is that how it works? Do you want to explain that a little bit?
No, it's very difficult. Planning and uncertainty in any business is absolute critical. And in order to have somebody want to do business with you, you have to have reliability. And they can't say, well, let's grow this year, but what about next year? Because a lot of these people have contracts that they need to fill year in and year out. And when you become unreliable, you're no longer even considered. And so many of these crops take a considerable amount of planning and preparation. And so you can't just flip a switch and say, okay, now they gave us water, let's farm.
And I assume that affects people who work on farms and communities around those farms, everything from businesses to restaurants to anyone that survives in those communities.
Absolutely. We try to keep people that work on our farm here year round, so there's continuity in the communities and things of that nature. But when you have so much uncertainty in terms of your water supply, because you can't farm without water. And so, yes, it impacts that. It impacts the school districts. It impacts jobs and opportunities. It impacts the American dream.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Duarte, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. One of the poster boards we have over here is a poster board out of my office, which depicts the Folsom South Canal extension. Folsom South Canal comes out of Folsom Reservoir, travels 27 miles south to the middle of nowhere, well, somewhere for someone, and terminates at 100 feet wide. It has the potential to carry 7,000 acre-feet a day of water from Folsom. It also crosses the Cosumnes, the San Andreas, the McCollum, and comes very, very close to the Stanislaus River, where it can pick up water at each of those crossings. We estimate the flood flows from Folsom alone, we have calculations actually, are between 200,000 and 500,000 acre-feet in normal to wet years. Mr. Phillips, you worked with the Bureau of Reclamation. What flexibility would a simple 50-mile extension of a canal add to the system in terms of South Delta deliveries?
Congressman, it would help with the South Delta from what I'm looking at here in terms of the water quality, which helps all of our operations, and I commend you for your creativity and looking at different options. And but per our discussions earlier, the critical stakeholders that could probably be supporters of this as well, that we should be reaching out to and make this work.
Thank you. Ms. Febo, you're always looking for water. What do you think? Would this help you?
This was a unique idea to me when we discussed it, but I think that this could be a very good way to get water that can't currently be captured, because Folsom Reservoir is small compared to its watershed. Be able to capture that water and bring it down, get the conveyance of that water outside of the natural rivers into a channel that we can actually bring it straight down to one of these areas here, and would definitely provide a more reliable water supply without having the issues in the Delta that we're facing in all of these regulations that we're talking about.
Thank you. Ms. Lucas, tell me what they're going to say and how we're going to apply the Data Quality Act to push back and make sure that common sense solutions can actually get built. In your
That's
estimation.
Such an easy question, Congressman. Thank you. I'm sure that this will be called the second coming of the devil and will lead to the precipitous decimation of every species we've ever cared about in the end of the environmental movement in California from our opponents. And the reason I say that with a degree of certainty is because that's what they say about everything. The fish have been on the precipice of extinction for 30 plus years. And we turned over the management to them, and they haven't gotten any better, but they claim that they are succeeding. The Endangered Species Act is approaching its 51st birthday. And in those 51 years, we have listed 1,700 species. We have recovered less than 2%. And that includes the species that were listed in error, but they still get counted credit.
Let me ask you a question. Another piece of legislation is reaching its 50th birthday here. It's the Clean Water Act. We had a wonderful hearing in Natural Resources Committee where we heard from some algae specialists that many municipalities around the Delta and Bay are still dumping non-tertiary treated effluent into the Delta, causing red algae blooms and killing fish by the scores and thousands. Is that, by your information, actually happening? And Mr. Herrick, you know something about these things. Are we still dumping non-tertiary treated effluent into the Delta?
Without identifying anybody, I believe we still are, yes.
And that causes algae blooms that gets in fish's gills and kills them by the scores.
And as the, excuse me for bringing it home, as the South Delta gets shallower and warmer, the problem gets even worse because of that, yes.
Would that be some low-hanging fruit if we actually wanted to cure species extinction? Would be not to flood the Delta with untreated nutrients and cause algae blooms that get in fish gills and kill them?
Yes, I know plenty of people that would thank you for that.
And the Clean Water Act was, as I understand it intimately, biblically in some sense, was to control point source pollution discharges into jurisdictional waters of the United States. Was it not?
If I may, I'm a believer in negative feedback. So until somebody starts, excuse the expression, humiliating the people that are making these bad decisions and not applying the rules correctly, it's not going to change. So it's the same political will issue, but there has to be focused public awareness of how poorly the system is being run by regulators.
Would it be fair to say that we are using the Delta for a toilet, so we're flushing it like a toilet with our ag water?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Good one. Mr. Fong, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to focus something that hasn't come up yet, and that's the issue of subsidence. And so, Mr. Phillips, clearly you and I have had a number of conversations about the fact that our water infrastructure across the state is aging, creating capacity and conveyance limitations across the valley. The Frank Kern Canal certainly has a significant issues of subsidence that is that's impacting its integrity. What are the major barriers to using proactive versus reactive tools in our arsenal to combat subsidence, which is threatening our ability to transport water throughout the valley?
Thank you, Congressman. And the major tool we need to be able to use is to get people who are overdrafting groundwater, get them surface water so that they can continue to farm without causing the subsidence. And the barriers to that is these same regulations that we are talking about, because there are a lot of coalitions of water agencies and ag agencies that are willing, through the San Joaquin River Water Blueprint, to develop options for infrastructure to get the surface water in. And the barriers are just the ability to get these projects through without having them so regulated.
Thank you.
Congressman,
Yes.
I'd like
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
add some
Absolutely.
historical perspective on this subject. We were overdrafting the aquifer in, I don't know when it started, but maybe the 30s. And they were farming out here on the west side of the valley when we first figured out how to drill wells and were able to start farming. And we created subsidence. And so the projects were built to deal with this. And so these pioneering individuals that actually got things done built these projects and solved the problem. And now that we're not using the system as it was intended, we have subsidence again.
May
Well,
I jump in?
okay, yeah,
really
absolutely.
quick? One other to exacerbate the problem. The very agency, the California State Water Resources Control Board, who is supposed to be the keeper of our water here in California, is actually contributing to subsidence. They passed the California Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan for the Tuolumne, Stanislaus, and Merced rivers. We call it the SED, or the unimpaired flow. It takes 30 to 50% of our water off the table, and in their environmental analysis, to ensure that they didn't have to worry about the impacts to the Bay Area's water supply, they adopted the conclusion that it would just be made up with groundwater pumping, and that Sigma was too speculative. So when it behooves them, they can just ignore their own regulations and create problems, which gets to Mr. Bordeaux's point.
If I may, real quick.
Absolutely.
Just to bring a bad example, as part of those hearings that were just referred to, I met with a member of the State Water Resources Control Board and went over the faulty science being used on one aspect. And the response from the State Water Resources Control Board member to me was, John, I can't go against staff. They'll think I don't trust them. And so I tried to tell that person that was their job as an appointed official to make sure things were done right. And the answer was, I can't do that because the system has to move on like it is. It's a congenital flaw in the system that nobody wants to do the right thing. They want to keep going where they are.
So let me follow up on that. It actually is a good bridge to my next question. And of course, anyone can jump in after your answer, Mr. Herrick. Certainly, we've seen a pattern emerge with the biological opinions and other regulations that's pushing to hold environmental water use as a priority over municipal and agricultural allocations. And the fact that we've got 3 empty chairs here is clearly an indication to me on this question. But I like to at least get a real-time analysis from you. What has been the engagement from the Bureau of Reclamation, the Fish and Wildlife Service, from NOAA, with the water districts, with the agriculture community, with local elected officials, when it comes to, for example, the 2024 biological opinions? Has there been any balanced engagement, or has it been just them using the hammer against you guys?
I'll be very brief because my issues are more discrete than the broader panel here. In my dealings with the Bureau of Reclamation, they are singularly uninterested in any sort of interaction. I have a meeting coming up with the regional director soon, so he's supposed to have a different attitude. In the past, they do not want to meet. They do not want to participate. They're not interested in what you want. Period. It's not a maybe. I have the state begging me to try to get the Bureau to work with them on joint things. The Bureau is a huge part of the problem. Period.
Does anyone else want to chime in? It's going to be therapeutic, just like Mr.
Well, when I was with the Bureau, they were very collaborative, Mr. Congressman. I think the one thing I would add to that, though, is because I believe the Bureau has been very collaborative within its contractors, but the transparency that we need, which is not built into the system, is to have more publicly debated what they're proposing to do. Both the Bureau, we're changing our operations. The Fish and Wildlife, we're imposing new requirements on Shasta. NIMS, we're requiring these new regulations. That's why I think there should be a moratorium on any new regulations on a project that's already been regulated unless it's approved by Congress. Use all the science you want, Fish and Wildlife, put it together. That's what we pay you to do. But it's the electeds that need to say, yes, we agree with you, or no, we're not willing to reallocate more water.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, can I add that they tend to look at, I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that.
I'll add that I don't think they understand the impact to the people that they are regulating. And I wish they would show up at places like this and see what devastation their bad decisions are making.
And I got my train of thought. They tend to treat the stakeholders who are actually the contract holders as if we're members of the public or the same as other stakeholders that are not the direct contract holders. And that makes it really difficult for the people who really know this system, the farmers who are actually farming, the people who are actually using this water and know the hydrology, to be able to provide input. They're very close to getting input from us separately from anything that they get from the public.
I appreciate it. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Thank you. So I'm just going to make a few comments and probably not ask questions, but one thing that would be hugely helpful would be someone putting together the numbers of how much money, how many jobs, how much was lost as a result of not having that water that you mentioned. So it's one thing to say, well, we're reduced by 30%. Well, so what does that mean? So you might want to supply us with the damage that flowed from not having the water. So please get us in some fashion those numbers. On the BIOP, we've been discussing, the staff and a bunch of us, a hearing on just how the BIOP process works so that we can bring to the nation's attention the politicalization of that process. There's zero doubt that it has been politicized, and I think we have all kinds of ammunition to use in that space, and we will use it. We actually had that on the books, that hearing, and elected to have this one instead. And so I'm very happy we're having this hearing. I'm very happy to be here, but we will be turning our attention to how the BIOP doesn't work right now. And I think we have a lot to say about that. On the issue of aquifer recharge, that's hugely important to all of us here. Didn't come up much today. I think it should have, because it actually, I think, works. And I did go visit. I went into the confusion of the University of California, Davis, and wandered about until I found the office of the professor from Germany who is doing all the work in this space. Spent 2 hours talking to her about it about a year ago. Quite interesting, and we will be doing perhaps a hearing on that, and perhaps not. You should all know that many of the issues we discussed today on the Endangered Species Act are addressed in the cleverly labeled ESA Amendments Act. Not that cleverly labeled, but the point is it will be introduced this week. And so if you're interested in seeing some of the solutions that have been designed to try to address some of what we've been talking about, you can obtain a copy of that by contacting the Natural Resources Water Committee staff and be happy to share it. This has been a great hearing, a great opportunity to see your wonderful valley. Congressman, thank you for your invitation. And Congressman, thank you for your invitation. And with that, I want to thank all of you for your testimony, members for their questions. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, September 11th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.